Hi everybody, welcome back to Raina Teachings. My name is Camacho. I am the trance channel to a beautiful being named Raina, and together we help you to heal, grow, and expand your consciousness. Our subject today is on shadow work. So I have talked about shadow work, and so has Raina in previous videos, but we haven't yet done a video specifically on shadow work. So I'll be talking about shadow work and why it's so important to your spiritual process. But before we get into that, I want to ask you to like and subscribe so that you can be, and hit the bell so that you can be notified of any future videos. And also follow us over on Instagram, where I post things that you will not find here on YouTube. All right, with all that out of the way, let's get into shadow work and why it's so important. The first thing that I want to say is I know that shadow work can be very confusing. There's a lot of different aspects to shadow work. And, sometimes it's talked about the negative parts of yourself. I know that it can come across as being the negative parts of yourself, but it isn't really. And I will explain why. So what shadow work is essentially is integrating the parts of yourself that have been denied. So this is a very vague way of speaking about it, but it's also very important. So integrating the parts of yourself that you have denied can be both in the positive or in the negative. And the reason integrating both of those things is so important is because we need to become a whole person. So if we're denying a part of ourself that is, let's say, very positive. So let's say I ignored the fact that I'm psychic. That's a part of my shadow. So before I knew that I was psychic, really, or before I knew what that word even meant, that was sitting in my shadow. It was something that was positive, but as long as it remained denied, it wouldn't show up in the way that it needed to show up for me. So this also goes for the things that may seem negative. So I'll still use the psychic part of that. So another thing that psychic people may have about them is manipulation. So that sounds like a terrible word, doesn't it? But manipulation is not in itself a negative thing. So somebody who is very psychic or very intuitive also has the aspect of being manipulative, but they can choose to use that positively, such as, in their psychic work once they get there, or they can use it very negatively. When something is in your shadow in a negative way and it continues to go unnoticed or denied, that's when it can show up in a way that will seem negative. And the reason is when we leave things in our shadow and we don't integrate, then the likelihood of us giving our power away to our ego comes in. And this is one of the really important parts of why shadow work is so important, because when you're opening and you're going through your awakening, a lot of different parts of you are blowing open. And if you skip over the shadow work, then your ego can grab some of those parts of you that would otherwise be very powerful and very positive and can kind of twist them and turn them if you're denying them yourself. So again, I know this subject can be very confusing, so I will do my best to explain what that means. So our experiences have to do with this. So the way that you're raised. So if you, let's say, had an abusive childhood, the manipulative psychic part of you could be used in, let's say, a criminal way, right? So that would be considered a dark shadow side of you. But once it's given over to the ego will use that in a way that is small. I don't want to say negative, but I want to say small. But if you're able to integrate that and to learn about yourself and go through healing work, then that manipulative side of you can be integrated in the dark shadow and really become a positive, powerful part of you. So, and I'm just using the psychic one as an example to make it easy. But that also goes for, let's say, arrogance. Let's say somebody can be very arrogant. That can also translate as confidence. So every part of you that is seemingly negative can also be positive. Then there are positive things. Let's say you're an artist and you have no idea you're an artist because you've never taken a class as an artist. The moment you take the class, that talent is going to come out in you. And then it's up to you to receive and accept, oh, wow, I'm an artist. That's really who I am. So that's really what shadow work is. And the reason it's so important is because it grounds your spiritual awakening. It grounds your spiritual experience. If we are unable to see the dark parts of ourselves or the light parts of ourselves, then the likelihood of us remaining a very imbalanced person is very high. And this is something that can be a big problem when you're awakening. So I've seen a lot of people go through their spiritual awakening and they'll want to only be positive. So they'll deny anything about them that's dark. Oh, I never get angry. Oh, I never do anything negative, basically. So the angry one is a really good example. That will come across as them being passive aggressive, possibly because they're trying so hard to pretend to be this very spiritual, positive person that it comes across as fake. And all of you have experienced that with somebody. Now, on the flip side of that, if someone has a tendency to maybe accept more of the darker parts of themselves, but they don't want to accept the lighter parts of themselves, rather than saying, I don't have any anger, they may, take on literally the opposite of that. And, oh yeah, I'm a very angry person and I'm comfortable there. You can see how that is also equally problematic. So integrating both sides, and Raina will talk about it as being the light side and the dark side of the shadow. Our shadow is our shadow, but it does contain both positive and negative aspects, or light and dark aspects. We live in duality. We're always dealing with duality in our reality. And so the shadow helps you to understand what that is within you. It also helps you to really create intimacy with yourself. And when you can really look at yourself and have enough intimacy to say, you know what, I can be very arrogant. I can be very manipulative. I can, give my power away to my ego and not listen, to someone who might know more than me. Those are really powerful statements, and it's a powerful place to be because your ego cannot manipulate you by telling you that you just know better. So imagine that's one that's really, difficult. When someone thinks they just know I know everything, I don't need to do shadow work. That's the most terrible one ever, because you won't grow. There won't be any growth without the shadow work. Your spiritual awakening will become very shallow, and you will only be you'll be very limited with what you're able to experience with yourself. Shadow work also helps you to be very humble, very, very humble. So humility is a big part of shadow work, but it's also a really big part of the spiritual awakening. So I've had many years now of into my spiritual awakening, and I'm a spiritual teacher, but even I would not say that I know everything, or never. In fact, I always say the longer I'm into this, and the more I know, the less I really know, because there's always things for you to discover about yourself, to discover about spirituality, and to discover about other people. So the other reason shadow work is extremely important too is it allows you to really see the reflections in your life. And this one has been, Debbie Ford did a good job of writing about this years ago. She talked about in her book, The Dark Side of the Light Chasers. That is a great book, by the way. That was one of my first spiritual books, and I'm really happy that I read it. What she talks about in there is what you don't like in other people, like things you really can't stand in other people, you have within yourself. And it's something that you need to really look at and to face, and that's very true. And I did an exercise, and it's something I even have my students do in class in the SAGE Spiritual Foundation program, is write down the things, about, I have them pick a person and write down the things about them that they can't stand. And to circle a few of them that they really, really can't stand. Those aspects are things that are very intimate within your own dark shadow that you really need to face. And it's hard. It's so hard, because when you don't like something about someone, of course your ego is going to come along and say, oh no, that's not you, that's them, and that's why you can't stand them. But that's not true. So, and usually when two people are really at odds with each other, like if you have a coworker, for instance, that you just really can't stand, I really challenge you to see, how am I like this person? How am I like them? And again, your ego is going to come up and it's going to want to tell you that you're not like them and all the rest of it. But that's not true. And here's the difference. This is how you can tell. You can look at someone and you can see things about them that are less favorable, I'll say, but it doesn't necessarily trigger you. When you become triggered by someone's negative aspect, it's because you also have it. And you probably most likely haven't looked at it deeply enough to know or understand that it's just a reflection. The universe will bring us experiences, but also people in our lives so that we can reflect upon ourselves. And this is really what self-realization is. So those reflections are really important so that you don't keep recreating the same things over and over in your life. So that's another important aspect of shadow work. And another one is projections. So projections are slightly different from reflections. Projections are something that we kind of like put onto another person. In some cases, that person might not be that way at all. And I find when we are less conscious, we tend to project like that more often. But even as you go through your spiritual awakening and you become more conscious, then you're able to literally project onto a person a certain something, like they may remind you of someone or something that you don't like so much. So it may start as a reflection, but the more you're able to put out energy into the world, you can literally sometimes project onto a person a certain way of being, and they may act that out for you. They may not do that with anyone else, but they're doing it with you. And it's a really sneaky thing about shadow work. So it's important to really watch your projections and your thoughts about who or what you think someone is, because you can literally create it sometimes. So that is another really important part of shadow work. Another thing that I learned about shadow work when I was going through it myself, and also in the beginning of my spiritual awakening, and this is something that I've not really seen anyone speak about, is the shadow is actually a being that it's no different than any other being that's with you in your life. So when I was first awakening, I used to see my shadow, and it kind of looked like the Grim Reaper, and it would freak me out. Honestly, I remember like putting the covers over my head and things like that. And I didn't know that it was my shadow. And it happened right around times where I was starting to go through my awakening, but I wasn't fully aware of it yet. So, and I know that most people won't experience this, but I did. So for those of you that may experience a sort of shadowy figure, a lot of hauntings, like house hauntings that I've been called for, what's really happening is they're seeing or experiencing their shadow somehow for the first time. So your shadow is a being that will hold for you everything that you were not yet ready to deal with, basically. So when you start to go through your awakening, the shadow wants to come and bring you those things that you need to deal with and to learn from and to grow. And that's a whole other subject and a whole other video. But I wanted to put that in here. It's important to understand that the shadow is not just the things that you experience. It is that, but it also is a being that holds those experiences. So in dealing with your shadow in meditation, in healing, and in growth, it is important to have a spiritual teacher to help you with that, because it is a complicated subject for that reason. And so going through each part of it with a spiritual teacher is important. I will put a link below to our foundation program. I do have a spiritual foundation program that has shadow work is in it. It isn't the only thing, but shadow work is definitely part of it if you're interested in that. The last thing I will say about shadow work is that it really is a beautiful thing when you come to a place where you're ready for shadow work. Not everybody's ready for shadow work. Sometimes in the beginning of your path, you want kind of the fun stuff. You're interested in psychic ability, you're interested in dreams, you're interested in kind of the how-tos or things like that. When you're ready for shadow work, let me tell you, you are about to amp it up. You're about to go to a level of depth with your spirituality that you are not capable of any other time except when you do shadow work. So shadow work is something that will come up multiple times on your journey, and anytime you're ready to tackle it, the growth that you have and the expansion that you're able to have with the responsibility that you can hold afterwards, because that's the point of it. When you really go through your shadow work, you're able to hold a responsibility with your purpose that you were unable to hold before. So it really is an incredible experience. I highly suggest it for everybody to go through your shadow work. But I also understand that at a certain point, sometimes we're not ready. So if you're running from it, constantly, and you've been on your journey for a while, I would say just go for it. Also, there's one other thing I wanted to say about denied parts of self. Shadow work also involves the denied parts of self that you have been before this lifetime. So often shadow work's talked about with the denied parts of self from this lifetime, and that's very important first, probably. But there are also denied parts of yourself that you had prior to this lifetime. And when you go through a spiritual awakening, those denied parts of self from past lifetimes are going to crop up again, and they're going to want healing and attention. And a lot of those often are talents that you have that you may be unaware of, that you've developed in prior lifetimes. And so again, the shadow will bring it to you so that you can continue with your development from your last lifetime. And that's the last thing that I will say about shadow work and why it is so important.